Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be showing my number one eyeshadow palettes from each brand in my collection. Welcome back, and today we are doing another eyeshadow palette tag challenge, which these are my kinds of favorite videos to do because I do like talking about my eyeshadow palettes and trying out them and so on. So this I think was another kind of good, this was another kind of video that I saw going around YouTube some time ago, so I thought that I would give my own spin to it. I think just like with many other creators, I'm not gonna be showing number one eyeshadow palette exactly from every brand that I own. So for purpose of this video, I narrowed it down that in order to include the brand in my video, I included the brands that I have own minimum three different palettes from. So from those brands that I only have one palette or two palettes, those are not included in this one. And why I draw it to three palettes was that in a lot of cases, especially even if I had two palettes from a brand, I couldn't make a distinctive decision enough that which one is my favorite. However, if you have three or more palettes, then there's usually one that stands out from the other two. So that is why I draw it up to three palettes. But of course, if you want to do this tag video yourself, or if you may go and watch other creators who did this, they might have gone about this a bit different way. So in my case, not exactly all the brands that I have in my eyeshadow palette collection, but every brand that I had minimum three eyeshadow palettes or more. But let's now get actually to the palettes, and I will be doing this kind of old school way. So first I will be showing the drugstore palettes, then the higher end palettes, and lastly we will talk about the indie palettes. And considering how big the indie pile I have in front of me, it's pretty easy to see that the most of the palettes that I have been collecting for the last couple of years have been mainly indie eyeshadow palettes, but there has been a couple of also higher end and drugstore brands that made it into this video. Okay, so let's start with the drugstore ones because those are usually the ones that I start these kind of videos with. So from drugstore, two brands made it into this video. So Kiko Milano and MUA are the brands, or actually now I'm lying, three. I just noticed I'm having one eyeshadow palette in the wrong pile, so we're gonna fix that quickly, and let's do that again. So three drugstore priced brands. I'm not gonna say completely drugstore because one of this is a brand that you can only buy online, but three drugstore priced brands that I have three or more palettes in my collections. And let's start with the sort of one that's accessible to online. So By Beauty Bay is a UK makeup retailer, and they have their own makeup aside. They also, of course, sell other brands on their website. And I have always said that especially if you live in UK and Europe and you're just looking for a good affordable brand to start trying out different kind of shades of eyeshadow and just experiment with eyeshadow, Beauty Bay is a good brand to start with because I think they have a color story for basically everyone, and also their pricing is pretty good, and also their formulas are quite good. My choice, this might not surprise those of you who know my favorite color stories. Prepared, you will be seeing a lot of pink tone palettes, by the way, in this video, so that tells quite a lot. But from Beauty Bay, I chose the Berries 42 pan palette. You could do with the 16 pan version of this. I bought the 42 pan because we all know that pink is my favorite color. So this is purely, aside from this one, I own the Rich palette, which is the sort of like burgundy toned neutral palette in the 16 pan version. And then I own the 42 pan earthy palette, which has the greens, and then there are some mustard neutrals, and then some also orangey leaning neutrals in that one. So from all of these three, these are all the three palettes that I currently have from Beauty Bay in my collection, and this is the one that is my favorite. And this is purely because of the color story, not necessarily because this is absolutely necessary. You could, as I said, do with the 16 pan version, but I love my pink, so that is why this is the number one from the Beauty Bay palettes. So next one is Kiko Milano, and again Kiko is one of those brands that I have exactly three eyeshadow palettes from. Kiko's eyeshadow palettes generally are pretty neutral leaning. Kiko is notorious for the fact that they also recycle their color stories a lot. So for example, when they have summer collections or Christmas collections, you usually see pretty similar color stories, not only with the eyeshadows but also with other products in general. So that's just something to consider if you're considering to buying like any products from Kiko. This was based on purely the fact that the best eyeshadow palette that I think had is the most recent one that I had gotten from the brand, and it has the better formula compared to two others that I have. So for this one I chose the Holiday Premiere, and this is the holiday palette that they had last year in their collection. And as you can see, this is by no means anything extraordinary. This is quite of a neutral palette, though I do like that you can kind of have a cool and warm toned looks with this one. But this is purely because the other two Kiko palettes have a bit of their like older formulas. This has a more like sparklier shimmers. And altogether, I do also think the matte formulas were improved a little bit for this one. So this is nothing special, but from the Kiko palettes, again, this is the one that's the like winner. So the last drugstore brand is MUA Makeup Academy, and actually from MUA I have had recently 2 of their palettes in my rotation, so actually I have altogether 4, but one of the palettes I haven't tested out yet, so I couldn't take that into consideration. But I had recently one of their actually relatively new bigger palettes in my rotation. That hasn't been included in my eyeshadow palette review videos yet, but I'm gonna bit spoil and say that I wasn't too impressed with the formula of the newer, bigger palette, so that is why still the Blush Nudes is my favorite eyeshadow palette from MUA. And this is purely because I think for the drugstore, considering that what kind of formula is included in this palette, the shimmers are this sort of very metallic, beautiful, the mattes are easy to blend and work with. And just I think that for the drugstore altogether, and considering how affordable these are, this is one of the better formulas you can get. And as I said, I did have 3 different palettes that I was like contemplating on. This was a clear favorite, and I'm a bit concerned now after trying one of their newest palette that has the same amount of shade that this had, that are they're sort of like maybe cutting back on their formulations, because as I said, it was pretty clear choice that I would choose this when I compared the formulas of that newer palette to this one. But so if you are considering buying from MUA, I would go with this one and not maybe with some of their newest palettes that they have come out after this one. So, high-end palettes, and from high-end palettes I had 3 brands altogether, just like with the drugstore ones, because with high-end palettes there were quite a few where only had 2 or 1 palette, and so with those it was kind of like, yeah, but I couldn't make then the distinction that, okay, but what were my absolute favorites, so that is why again we're having like, I put that threshold to 3 palettes. So let's start with Dior, and actually I am wearing the newest Dior Backstage Holiday Eyeshadow Palette on my eyes today, so that I wasn't able to put that when I was considering which Dior palette, and also I have the one of the Dior's mainline holiday palettes also in my makeup rotation currently, but because I'm still testing those out, those weren't included into consideration because I still haven't been able to sort of wrap my conclusive thoughts about them. So I was mainly doing the decision between 3 Backstage palettes that I've tried from the brand before. And this probably isn't gonna surprise anyone, so I chose the Silver Essentials from the Backstage line. I think that this still has one of the like best formulas that I have tried from the Dior palettes, and now I can say that I have tried quite a few of these ones. And also just I think the color story and bit like variety what you can get with this one is just I think very like, there is like you can get a bit of purple look, bit of silver look, but altogether just the formula, how opaque these shades are, how buttery they are and easy they are to blend. This is like still a clear favorite from all the Dior palettes that I have tried so far. But we will have to see as I have tried the newest Backstage palette and the sort of mainline holiday palette, that maybe as I am doing my end of the year ranking, then we will see how I thought about those all together. Next one, Natasha Denona. So with Natasha Denona I actually did have a fair share of palettes to choose from, because I did manage to collect two of the like palettes that are in her newer formulas, and I have had collected so many of her palettes before, so I had quite many to choose from. However, despite maybe thinking that, well, I have now 2 palettes in her upgraded formula, the I Need a Nude and the I Need a Warm, but this was still like pretty obvious, so for me, this one, the Retro palette, and this is purely based on the color story, so I really would wish, and I did discuss this maybe in a what was the last eyeshadow? I did the eyeshadow wardrobe tag video, and in that tag video I did discuss that I would wish now that she would do a revamped version of this one, because the age of the formula, especially with the retro, is starting to show. But in terms of color story, it's this sort of like mauvish pinkish tones, and altogether I generally like all my looks that I come out with this particular palette. But as I said, I would hope that we will get some kind of revamped version of this one, because this formula is starting to show its age. Then the last high-end brand, and this was Pat McGrath, and from Pat McGrath I have two of their smaller holiday palettes that are the Quints, and then I have three motherships, but like I think this again has been something that I've talked about before in terms of my motherships. So I chose the Divine Rose 2, which is purely based on a color story preference rather than maybe is it a palette that I actually use a lot. So this is the one, this has the special packaging, and this is how the palette is looking like. And again, this is just like, I don't use this palette too many times or like during the year, but just the fact that this has the sort of pinks combined with the golds, it's still like a favorite color story for me, and it's a very sort of comfort color story that I go towards. But this is a color story now that we have seen from Pat McGrath quite many times over and over again. I think there's now a general joke in the makeup community that Pat McGrath just only has done several iterations of this Divine Rose format that I think got sold quite many of her palettes, but I haven't been buying a lot of like Pat McGrath palettes in recent years, and that's just, I think, shows that I think there's been a bit of a downgrade when I have seen the formulations that have been in the newer palettes, and just the fact that the color stories, I mean, I think she's been very stuck with this pink golden color story, and there's like only so many palettes in this color story that I think a person needs to collect. So for me, I'm happy with this Divine Rose 2 that I have, and from all the Pat McGrath like motherships, and when I also consider the holiday palettes, this is still the favorite one for me. So those were all the high-end ones, and let's now lastly go to the indie ones. And from indie there was quite a lot of more, and I'm actually gonna have to lift the pile that I have with these ones. So first one, I really always have a bit hard time thinking that where do I categorize this particular brand, but as far as I know, this is technically an indie brand. So P. Louise is a UK-based brand. They are quite a mid-range brand, and they have usually indie brands are known for eyeshadow, but P. Louise actually, they have a range of different products. They have cheeks, they have base, they have lip products. But as far as I know, they are independently owned brands, so that is why they are ranked in this one. So from P. Louise, I have altogether exactly 3 palettes. And this was a lot, again, just based on that, well, what palette is the one that I will use from the most, and for me it was this one. So this is the Fall in Love palette, and I think this was their Valentine's palette or something, like this is a bit older palette in their collection. But this was again pretty easy when I considered that I have one of the big 2-tiered ones, which is an all blue palette, but while the quality of that palette is, I think, quite good, but I don't wear blues that often. So while it's a good palette, it's just a color story that I don't gravitate towards. And then I have one of the Stack 'em Up palettes, but again, that's a more orangey, yellow leaning palette, and again, oranges especially are maybe not colors that I gravitate towards, especially if it's a orange heavy palette. It's not something that I will most likely use that much. So purely because this is basically a neutral palette that has a bit of pinks and peaches in it, that's why it got as a #1 palette from all the P. Louise palettes that I own. I have been eyeing some of their Christmas stuff. They have been now slowly like really revealing what they are having for Christmas, and also I think as their Black Friday special releases, and I think within those launches there might be some palettes that I might be interested to try from the brand. But yeah, from the ones that I currently own, the Fall in Love was Fall in Love was the one that I chose. So Adept was next, and with Adept I actually I was able to also consider the Unity palette, which again you haven't seen it on my eyeshadow palette review video, but that has been in my 2-week rotation. And this was a pretty tough choice. So from altogether Adept I have the Sumerian Sunset, the Unity, the Minka, and the Plain Jane Remastered palette, and there's a lot of things that I did like. I think I do prefer in the Unity palette over this one, especially the shimmer formulas, because with the Unity I feel that the shimmer formulation has been a bit refined. But then I had to consider that, well, compared to the wow effect I get with this one, this was still the favorite. So I chose the Sumerian Sunset for this video, and this is purely because of the fact that yeah, some of these shimmer formulas, they are a bit finicky. If you have a texture on your lids, some of these might not suit you, but they are still like very beautiful shifty shades. I have always said that this is my ultimate fall palette, like when you consider the color story this has. And the shimmers are still very beautiful, and they are not like in a way that some of the especially older indie formulas that they cause a lot of creasing on your lids or something like that, or they're just chunky. This has a couple of the chunkier formulas, but they are still, I think, workable. So for the wow effect this gives, even though I did like the formulations of the Unity palette a bit better, but because the shades in this one get a bit better, like a wow effect, that is why I chose it for being my number one adept palette. But it was a pretty tough competition when I was making the consideration regarding the adept. So Gloss Gods is a Swedish indie brand, and it's a brand also that I have quite many palettes from because it's quite an easy brand for me to get. They haven't recently come out with palettes that I have been like, no wait, I did get the Bronzy Summer palette that they did release, but generally I think from Gloss Gods, because I do remember like I think maybe last year or the year before was a year that I actually bought quite many palettes from the brand, but now I definitely think that it has slowed down, but also I do think the brand generally hasn't been releasing that many eyeshadow palettes, so that's also something to consider. But from all the Gloss Gods palette that I thought that what would be my number one is this one. So this is the Vintage Glam palette, and this actually, I don't know is this discontinued, but for me, why I chose this, it's pretty easy. It has some neutrals with some lilacs and pink, so for me this is a nice color story where I have sort of my favorite colorful shades combined with some neutral shades, and the shimmers that are included in this one are also very beautiful. But generally I do think that if you especially like live in Europe and you're looking for a good indie brand to try, I think Gloss Gods they are reasonably priced. You can use, I think, influencer codes to bring the price of the palettes down. And also I think the shipping has been like, it's not the quickest, but it does, because it comes within European Union, it's quite, still you don't have to wait weeks and weeks. And I do think they have quite a lot of like variety. If you go to their website, they have like mixed palette that have mattes and shimmers. They also have these all shimmer palettes with special shades, so there's also quite a lot from where to choose from. But from all the palettes that I had, the Vintage Glam is definitely one of my like number one palettes. Then another European indie brand, so from Glam Shop, it's a brand that I haven't been buying that much from, I think now for over a year, and I think this mainly shows they have had some actually other products in other categories. Glam Shop is one of those rare indie brands, again, that they also do base products, cheek products and lip products, so you can actually get a full face if you shop from their website. They have come out with some products that I have been interested in, but the eyeshadow palette releases also, I think they have also slowed down a bit, because I do remember one point they had a lot of like pre-made palettes available on their website, but now I feel that they have like paced out their releases, and the eyeshadow palettes they have come out with during the last year or so haven't been that like attractive to me. So I had basically the palettes, I have one custom palette that have their multi-chrome shades, then I had one all neutral matte palette, all neutral shimmer palette, and then I had a mixed palette. So just again I went with the Glam Shop with the thinking that, well, what's the all-around palette I can use alone, and for that one it was pretty easy, so I chose this one. So this is Pokusa Seduction, I think is the English translation for this for Polish. Again, I do think like you can kind of maybe see also that aside from the fact that this is an all-around standalone palette that I can use, but again this has neutrals, this has a bit of pinks, there's a bit of lilacs. This was their spring release a few years ago, so this is a bit on the older side, and this definitely does have one of those maybe bit, how should I say, maybe a bit of the older sort of indie type of shimmer shades where some of them are a bit chunkier, so you do have to do some finicking to get them work. But I do like the color story, and the looks that I have come out with this one previously have been very pretty, and I do think for spring and generally if you like your pinks and lilacs with some neutrals, this is pretty good palette. Unfortunately this is no longer available, so you can't buy it, but if you have this in your collection, at least I would recommend digging it out, because I do still think this is a very beautiful palette from the brand. Next brand we're talking about is Cosmic Brushes, or I'm not sure have they now finished their rebranding, or is it Cosmic Beauty, but you do know what I'm talking about if you have followed the indie community. I haven't, again, Cosmic Brushes has actually been one of those brands that I haven't bought from them now from I think from almost like over a year, and that's just purely because of the color story. So the Cosmic Brushes have actually launched, they have launched during this year, I think. Have they launched like Did the winter palette come technically in the beginning of this year, or did they manage to launch it in Christmas last year? Because they had the, I think, Winter Wonderland, then they had the 2 neutral palettes, and then they recently had the sort of Earth Tone palette. So it's not that they haven't been coming out with palettes, but the color stores just haven't been vibing. So I had 4 palettes that are a bit older that I chose from. And this probably, if you saw my eyeshadow ranking last year, not a particular surprise. So the Muse palette is still like my favorite from the palettes that I own from the brand, and here is what this looks like. So this obviously doesn't have the newest multi-chrome formulas that they have included in their palette, especially the ones that have launched during this year. But for me, this is again a beautiful palette. It's a bit of a neutral leaning, but then you have some beautiful greens, there are some pinks, there are some purples. And I do think that before, well, now they actually do have true neutral palettes in their collection. But before those palettes, I think this was the most like neutral leaning of all the like palettes they had in their collection. And I do think this is actually still a good palette. So if you're someone who's looking to dip into color, but you also want to have your like neutrals, then this is still something that I would recommend. I still like the formulas in these older palettes, even though they don't have the like the very shifty formulas they have now. But I would be hoping that maybe if they still, I don't know what's the launch schedule, so is it so that the fall themed palette they recently had, is it the last launch they will have during this year? But maybe if their winter themed palette this year, if it was launched during like still around this year, then could that still be something I would be interested in? But we shall have to see, because of course beforehand we don't know the color stories they are planning to launch. But it's a very high quality indie brand, and again Cosmic Brushes is actually one of those brands that they are not so. The prices of the palettes have gone up because they are now using more multichromes in the palettes, but it's still like I think very decently priced indie brand, and especially their matte quality is pretty awesome. So the 2 other brands that we're still talking about, again, this is actually a brand that I actually do have quite a big collection from, and this is Oden's Eye, so another Swedish indie brand. And Oden's Eye again is a brand that I haven't been buying from recently, but that's just because I am starting to feel maybe a bit that they are maybe getting, because Oden's Eye have definitely now been around for quite some time now, so I think with Oden's Eye it is starting to show that maybe they are, I wouldn't say that they are now maybe like that they no longer have any color stories to do palettes in, but some of the palettes are beginning to look a bit like palettes they have already maybe launched previously, or that the color stories, some of them I have been feeling have been very missed in terms of the fact that previously I think Oden's Eye had pretty good and cohesive color stories when they planned the palettes, but some of the recent palettes I've been looking out and thinking that okay, that's a bit of a too mishmashy for my taste. So yeah, Oden's Eye definitely a brand that has come out with a lot of palettes still during this year, but unfortunately none of them have been attractive to me to buy. But from the palettes that I own from the brand, this is the original Angelica Nyqvist and Hella palette, and this is a pink and green palette. And for me, this is again has been one of those colorful palettes where you do have some colors, but also some of the greens here are maybe a bit more on the neutral leaning. It has a bit of like this, also I think there's a bit like almost like yellow leaning greens. And you actually did have also quite nice depth within this palette. So I have especially liked to use this during the springtime. But again, this is, I think, for those that if you're very afraid of using color, I think Angie did a quite smart thing with this one, that yeah, you have some colorful shades, but not all of them are very punchy colors, but you have some more muted colors in this one, and you actually also do have a bit of neutrals in this one to balance out the other shades. I still think this is one of the best color stories the brand has come out with, like from all the palettes that I own from them and because this was done with one of my favorite YouTubers, it was obviously an easy pick from all the Oden's Eye palettes that I own. Last brand we're gonna talk about is Blend Bunny, and Blend Bunny was one of those brands that I had exactly 3 palettes from. And this again was a very, how should I say, easy choice, and I think I have been showcasing this a lot in my channel. So my ultimate favorite palette from Blend Bunny is still the Dollhouse palette, even though I did recently try the more cool toned palette. Now I'm blanking what's the name of that one, but with that one I did discuss in my eyeshadow palette review video that while I did actually like the shimmers, because that was the first Blend Bunny palette that I got that had the sort of very sparkly shimmer formula, and there was even one multichrome in the palette. However, I felt that that palette went quite deep. But with this one, this has like enough tone variety within it. So this has my mid-tone shade, it has my lighter shade, it has my deepening up shades, and the shimmers, well, these aren't the most sparkliest of indie shimmers, or the shimmers that Blend Bunny now has in their palettes. This is still a very, like, the shimmers are still very beautiful on your lids. They are definitely more, I'd say, maybe more metallic would be the good description of these ones. So not maybe as sparkly, maybe more on the side of traditional metallic shades, but still very beautiful. And this is again one of those, because it's a like matte heavy palette, that if you like, especially like the matte tones, then you can dig out maybe some of your other indie palettes that have like better shimmer formulas. But for me, this is still an absolute favorite in terms of the shades and just the like combination of looks that I can get with this one. But yeah, those were all the palettes that I had for this video. This was a very fun video to do. I have always said that I like talking about my eyeshadow palette, so I'm always looking for a good excuse to do another tag video, and I do think it helped a lot putting the threshold for 3 palettes or more, because as I said, with 1 or 2 palettes it's a bit more always like that, well, I can like the one palette that I have a lot, or then that fact that if I have 2 palettes, then maybe one of them, I think maybe one of them is a bit better. But I think definitely with putting it like 3 or more palettes, it was very easy to get distinct differences, which was my absolute favorite. Comment down below what did you think about some of the choices that I made here, and what would be your #1 palettes from the brands you own. If you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell button if you want to get notifications from my future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope I'll again see you soon in another video. Bye bye!